Mmusi Maimane, wasn't long ago, 2 months ago, you were in the studio, you said, yeah, you're throwing your hat in the ring for president.
Yeah.
But now 2 weeks ago, on a very important day here in South Africa, Heritage Day, you said you're more than throwing your your hat in the ring, you've created a new political party.
Yeah.
It's like the fashion to have a new political party.
Yeah, I hope it becomes less and less so. But, I genuinely believe in this country. I genuinely think the people of this country are looking for an alternative. I know that our fight in amending the Electoral Act is one that's still ongoing, but won't be ready before 2024. So the only way legitimately you can run for presidency is to run with a political party and invite citizens who share your values to stand with you and contest in 2024. So if we are true about what we believe, if we believe in a world that's non-racial, if we believe that this country is worth fighting for and saving, then we not only cannot afford to sit on the sidelines, we have to do our best to get in the ring and fight for it in the best way we can. This is me doing that.
Man in the arena.
Yeah, certainly. And
you've mentioned that a few times, and it's Teddy Roosevelt's speech. Do you know it off by heart?
Well, not the full quote.
Shall I read it?
Please do.
Because it's cool. I mean, it's very, very powerful. It is not the critic who counts, nor the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Now, you've mentioned this man in the arena a few times, and I wanted to ask you, why does that resonate with you? That thing that was Teddy Roosevelt said before there was even a Union of South Africa in 1910, more than 100 years ago.
Both because it's aspirational. I think it sits within every human being to seek to do something great, and I think it is emblematic of our country that despite all the negativity that sits, we've triumphed before, and I'm convinced we can again. But it also, at a personal level, summarizes some of my journey in the last number of years. I know what it's like to fail and fail greatly. I know defeat. I know what it's like to walk away from Parliament to literally no income. I know what it's like to be victorious at an election, to set up coalition governments and everybody celebrate that. And I've also known the fact that anything worth doing requires the intensity of the fight. So I like to consider myself as someone who says your actions, however impossible, however difficult they may be, are better than inaction born out of some form of inertia and thinking and overthinking things and sitting on the sideline and kind of going, well, it's impossible, because that becomes highly cynical. I remember the words of Barack Obama in his final address in Chicago, where he said, the thing we must guard against the most is cynicism. Because once you're cynical, I happen to think that those are the seedbeds of corruption. Once you're cynical, you forget the fact that it is still possible to do something of great significance. And others, as I opened my address on Heritage Day, said that others would think we're crazy. But then again, it is indeed the crazy ones who tend to try and change the world.
Steve Jobs. R.W. Johnson at the BizNews conference had some very interesting things to say, but a recent piece of his, he said that in the UK, the reason they're in such a mess is that they haven't got the first 11 in politics, or even the second 11. Now it's the third, maybe the fourth 11, using the cricket parlance.
Yeah.
Seeing you come back into the ring, seeing Herman Mashaba back in the ring, some of the really good guys, Athol Trollip, who you knew very well from the DA days. It's almost like, well, maybe we are getting the first 11 back here into the South African political arena?
I think in many ways we have to strive for that, and yes, we are. But in another way, I also think we need to build the systems that ensure that we get their best 11 back in Parliament, to use the analogy. And by that, what I mean is, it's also the effort that I'm putting in is about also going out into communities to identify superstars who can stand for Parliament. I think what Herman is doing is phenomenal, but he was a businessman sitting on the sidelines, and he'll tell you, I went up to him and said to him, come run for mayor of Joburg. Because I think politics suffers when it's stale. It suffers when you've got the same players wearing different color shirts and trying to play the same game. What we also need is to ensure at our best that we can go and recruit from outside. And I think history has taught us some incredible lessons. When I think about Trevor Manuel, is a good example. Trevor Manuel once said something to me that has in many ways stuck with me. He said, when they fought the struggle, they never thought of it as an opportunity to get into public office. They thought about it as fighting the struggle to be able to serve the people. And it so happened that they ended up in office. And if you can recall that cabinet of 2000 or the early 2000 all the way to 2008 under President Mbeki, in truth, these were young people who dared. And young in relative political terms, People like Trevor Manuel, people like Tito Mboweni, people like, so many of them were in some ways 30s, 40s, to be fair, when we reflect. We see them today in their 60s. But in truth, these were inexperienced people in government at least, but with the requisite skill and the resolute focus to deliver for South Africa.
To serve.
And we have to, if we're going to get ourselves out of this situation, that must be our first lens. We've got to say, my analogy I like to use is that it doesn't matter how brilliant a golfer you are. If you're playing with plastic clubs, you're going to get a hiding all the time. So the big trick now is that we build the most capable golf clubs we can imagine, so that whatever policy decisions we arrive at, we have an incredible ability to deliver against that. And we have to build it. And so one of the things that I've gone out is I'm scouring the country for the best talent and saying politics is too important to be left up to politicians, as the famous saying goes. But we've got to get business people, civic society leaders, a variety of citizens to participate in our electoral system so that we can build the best 11.
The country's missed you, Mmusi. And just what you've said now, I think anybody watching this will say, okay, I resonate. It resonates with me. But why do you need another political party? You had the One South Africa movement.
Yeah.
I like this story very much, and I think many other people did. You were going into the communities, getting independence, helping the independents maybe to swing the balance of power.
Yeah.
Has the change in the Electoral Act, or perhaps the dragging of feet in the change in the Electoral Act, changed your strategy?
It had to do that, and we'll continue to fight for electoral reform, both inside Parliament and for the long term of this country, because I still hold the beliefs that say that politicians are best functional when they're accountable to communities, directly elected by the people. So that doesn't change. What has needed to happen here, and here are some key impediments to this issue. So if I said anyone, an independent, must stand for elections, let me use Rob Hersoff as a name. He would need to get 80,000 votes, which is impossible, generally speaking, because I think political parties get less than that and get 2 seats. And even more seriously, the ability to register to be on the ballot takes harder work, in the sense that you need about 15,000 signatures, and actually a political party only needs 1,000. So the typical analogy I've used is to say, the Parliament is asking people to say, if you want to run the Comrades as an independent, you're going to have to run backwards without shoes, and we'll hopefully see you at the finishing line. And it's clearly impossible. So we've had to change strategy. We don't change the principle. We've put together a political party. I also believe version 2.0 is that at some level, we are franchising the model of politics by saying, given the vision that we hold for this country, and I've always told you that my rallying call for South Africans is it possible to put a job in every home, right? So if you just take that as a rallying call, as a build a wall, as a make a chicken in every pot.
Don't say build the wall.
No, I know that. But just saying it for those who might have followed that. But if that is our organizing mission, or then everything that we do, whether it's legislation, we must answer, does it put a job in every home? Whether it is education, does it help our kids get through school so we put a job in every home? Whether it's healthcare, do we have a healthy labor system? Whether it's about safety, can we get tourists in the country so that we can create a job in every home? So that's our organizing mission, and I would argue that now we can aggregate all the citizens in their communities to be really excited about the fact that I can put jobs in my community, or I can put jobs in my street. And if we get more people animated by that, I really believe this whole meta conversation that former president is having and others are having about a lack of consensus, I always say to ourselves, actually, the only consensus we need to come down to is to say, can we deliver economic prosperity for all citizens and make sure everyone is safe? If we work on that and build South Africa, we can ask business to do that, we can ask civic society to do that, and ultimately we have a goal. And to underscore the point, when we targeted the World Cup in 2010, no one can deny that this country, we had a budget surplus, we were able to ride the 2008 crash. Actually, the murder rate in 2010 was less. And equally so, it gave us something as a country that we could put our stake to and focus on. I'm saying 2024 to 2029, etc., we've got to put that on the table, ask every citizen to focus on nothing else but that. And I think we can turn what this country has shown before, it can do again.
You mentioned Barack Obama. He, in his first presidential term, was a surprise winner, not just because he beat Hillary Clinton in the primaries, but he also won the presidency.
Yeah.
And he used social media a lot. Now, of all the players on social media, you seem to have used it to advantage rather than your former colleague Helen Ziller, who sometimes uses it to disadvantage. And you still got almost 2 million people who are following you on Twitter, for instance. Is that a big part of the Build One SA movement into the future? Or how are you going to, it's 19 months to go, 18 months to go perhaps, to the next 2024 election. How are you going to get the heft to be a significant force in Parliament?
Yeah. On all platforms, we've got to build an audience with over 5.5 million South Africans, of which across all platforms, whether it's social media, traditional media, whether it's on all kinds of platforms, we've got to build an audience with citizens. And so that's the first. We're building probably the most sophisticated engagement platform that will allow us to really effectively be able to talk to people about their needs, let them interact with us, because we now live in a world where everything is digital. Citizens are digital citizens, and South Africans more particularly, across all racial demographics, have got cell phones. They're able to engage with you. And I think to us, the mechanism is there. And if I look at what Barack Obama was able to do, not only did he do that, but he also supplemented it with a very intense ground war that came out of a digital platform to say, help people fund, but help people mobilize. And I think we can inspire hope by being able to build both. And technology now allows us to go that much further, that much quicker. It doesn't change that it's costly, but I certainly think, again, if you stop thinking just with a political cap on and start to genuinely think, what is the science behind politics, but also what is the aspiration that all citizens want, I really believe we can put together a compelling offer. And I've been overwhelmed. Since the launch, we've seen thousands of people come and join Build One South Africa. Since the launch, we've seen business come together, say, fine, forget funding, forget all of that, but let's discuss what can we do as our form of activism. And it's been so great to be able to not only say to them, let's get involved with politics, but to say to them, right now is a time, maybe donate a vehicle to your local police station because the police don't have cars to get to where they need to go, or maybe in some ways, let's all, over a long period of time, volunteer to do X, Y, and Z and use all our available resources to indeed build this country, because it's going to take more than government to build where this country's got to go.
But to get a significant voice in Parliament is going to need a lot of effort. We've heard from Herman how he's been at it now for 2, maybe 3 years, how he's got his volunteers in there signing up people, just getting them to register to vote. What are you going to... And I get the digital side, and
Sure.
you're much better than most politicians in South Africa at using the digital tools. But where's your plan? Where's your target for 2024?
As I said, we've been able to segment 5.5 million citizens.
How?
We know, well, one is you run intensive research. So before we went into the ring, we had a firm understanding of where it is. Secondly, we were clear about where they are located. So we know 40% of them sit in rural communities and 60% in urban areas. Thirdly, I think that with the work that we've been doing in One SA, we've been able to engage citizens, get to know them better, get to know what their needs are, but also have activists in communities who are able to go out, communicate our message. So we're not starting from a zero base. We built significant infrastructure. I also do think that, lastly, our model relies itself on being able to go, can communities own their own political project? So naturally, then you are not the, if you like, the solution to all people's problems. You are an enabler of solutions in communities. So when you get the best candidates, there's a basic rule, like get the best candidate in a community who's able to, they come with their own audience, they bring their own people, and you are able to work with those people so that they understand where the thing goes.
Have you had much success yet in doing that? Because you've been at it for a while.
Sure, certainly. We've got a number of councillors elected across the country. That was the first proof point. And in rural communities, we were able to get where everyone was saying the ANC is strong in rural areas, will never be beaten. Look at the independence in the Eastern Cape and what they were able to do with Ken Clark. Look at what happens in Grahamstown. Look at what happened in Sesotho. Look at all of these communities. So I'm convinced that, like the civil rights movement, it was fought and waged by people in the US context, by people who weren't in elected office. They were committed to change. They congregated, in their instance, in church communities, but they came out to do that. South Africa is going to go through the same. And I think the best rider we can put for people is to be able to go, let's engage citizens, because those people are willing to do things for free. Someone who's sitting in a community running an NGO doing X, Y, and Z is doing those things for free. And we found some of our best candidates have been people who are willing to sit in their communities and say, come, let me now stand for public office. And if the community will get behind me, they'll bring change. So we are working hard on that, but it's not only that. That's why we needed a national brand so that we can ensure that we maximize the assets that sit across the country.
Where are your votes going to come from?
They're coming in on balance in those major provinces that I've just indicated.
But from the ANC, from those who haven't voted, those who've given up, those who vote for the DA at the moment, where are you likely to be able to pull people across?
I want to talk to citizens who share values like mine. And I know it sounds easier, but there are voters who sit within the ANC who say, I actually want a non-racial country. I want a country that is safe. I want jobs, I want education. They like me. There are voters who sit, who are registered to vote. So of the ballot paper of 19 million, not the ballot paper, I mean the voters roll of 19 million people, there is enough in there of citizens that sit at 5.5 million who have already would commit and share the values. They are currently sitting fearful. They're worried about what's going to happen to when the ANC collapse. They're worried about their tomorrow. We've got to be able to guide them in a time of crisis to be able to say, we have a plan to get you out. So that's already within the registered constituency. So you don't have to pay all the school fees of getting them registered. But furthermore, I think, I was on another radio show this morning with young people, and young people have been an incredible responder to this issue. As we see in universities, we're seeing places like that. Let me take one simple example. If you look at the UCT elections that have just taken place right now, the biggest winners in that were all independent candidates. They divorced themselves effectively from the current political system and said, we want to work for something different. So I think young people are looking for something fresh. The work that we've got to do is the work that inspires hope. It's the work that tangibly shows people we've got a plan, because young people didn't fight for fees must fall for you to stand up and say to them that you're going to make it impossible for a kid to get into university. Make it possible for them to do that. I think they'll align, they'll register to vote, and they'll do the job that you need them to do.
a lot of the research that we've seen is that, yes, people know the ANC is bad and corrupt and they shouldn't be running the country, and they don't run the country, but don't run even municipalities well. But the opposition parties keep fighting amongst each other, and as a result, why vote for them? Because it'll just be more of the same. How do you convince somebody who's got that approach? Because if you can do that, then it's almost like the holy grail of South African politics right now.
And it isn't, that person is a normal person. You know, they're not a super special being. That person wants someone they can trust, someone who hasn't stolen money. That person wants leadership that has a vision. They know that I don't sit here before you as a hater of the ANC or as a hater of the opposition. I sit before you as someone who says, we've got to seek our hopes. We've got to be better. We got to call out the best in ourselves. So to that person, more specifically, I think they're desperate for leadership that will say, what happens in a post-liberation era? Can we build a new competent government that can take us forward? Because that person is sad to see the ANC collapse. They're disappointed with the opposition, but they're not giving up on this country.
Do you think if you stayed at the DA, things would have been different now? You'd have been going into this election because there is a perception that DA is a white party, and there are many black people who will not vote for the DA on that principle because they lived through apartheid and whatever. Do you think it might have been different? Ethel Trollip was telling me the other day it might have been.
I don't know, to be honest with you, because part of my lament is that regardless of staying or not staying, South Africa needs a new centrist movement that sits in the middle, that calls values that are new South African. And I'm not suggesting, one of the hard things that I try to do within the DA is to say, can we change this organization to really become centrist and become that? And it became sometimes a tug of war that was hard. And I think the ANC has forgotten and foregone the center ground. South Africa suffers because it doesn't have values. So I do think regardless, if we don't build something that sits in the middle, our politics will always, to the point you've just made, be reduced to black versus white, black parties, white parties. It's a bit of an anathema for me. Personally, I'm in a mixed race marriage. We got mixed race kids. I live in communities that are diverse. I prefer the diversity of our country. And it would be amiss to not build a political party that does so. So unless we were willing to be pliable on those issues, I think sometimes we found ourselves hitting a very strong tug of war that eventually, in the eyes of the voters, sometimes would see a fight between black versus white, even within the DA, which kind of, I thought to myself, didn't help the broader issue. That the DA must exist, of course it must. It must do well, and it must. And I would hope that ultimately, as we build going forward, they can be part of the contributors of where this country needs to go.
Coalition politics. We've had a really rocky start. Here in Johannesburg, it looks appalling. But Nelson Mandela Bay might just be getting it right, and the deputy mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay is your national chairman, which is an interesting development. How did he come to join you?
Kuster Jack has been a South African I've celebrated for a long time. You'll remember he was one of the few who organized Nelson Mandela's one and only rally in the Eastern Cape post-liberation. So he comes with a pedigree of his own, but I love the fact that he's been engaged in business, and I love the fact that he wanted to bring change and challenge that even through his movement. So there was already a connection of heart that said, on values we align, on vision we align, can we work together for the future of this country? And we certainly have been working together in that regard. We've had conversations for a long period of time, and along with many others that are similar to him. And it shows the point. The point is, if you can bring South Africans and strip them away of their historical baggage, or even and bring them around values, you genuinely can make a credible offer. And I want to wish the coalition in Nelson Mandela Bay well, because whether we like it or not, that we may say we've had a few false starts in coalitions is a function of the fact that we are a fairly young democracy relative to our SADC region. We're the youngest democracy. But we cannot afford one-party dominance, because one-party dominance has delivered state capture and the very issues that we face today. Johannesburg isn't just falling apart because of the coalition. It's falling apart because its infrastructure was left to decay. Its financially was facing very difficult days. So coalition or no coalition, I think we can put all the rot into the coalition basket, but it doesn't quite work like that. There's a history of neglect in Johannesburg that we needed to attend to. So how we make coalitions work better is the question we should all be obsessed with, rather than saying we don't need coalitions. And the starting point there is to say, can we be clear about our values? Can we, before we establish any government, give longer period of time for negotiation, so that there's a credible plan that acts as a binding contract, not some secret backdoor room? I've been frustrated that even in the mess of these coalitions, the leaders who held a press conference together saying we are now forming a coalition haven't had the decency to come back to us as citizens and sit in one room and say, here's why it's not working. Instead, we're being treated to this he said, she said nonsense, which we cannot afford. So we need a binding contract that we make public for all citizens, so that when things fall apart, all of us as citizens are well informed of that. But we also need to strip the bureaucracy of the politics. Today, whether you might say the new mayor of Joburg or the old mayor of Joburg is what? The city manager must be at every water treatment plant demonstrating the fact that regardless of who's in charge of the political governance, the administration is still on top of the issue. And what we've seen under one-party dominance is the capture of the state, that anyone who stands up, even in the administration, feels like they're beholden to a political party. The last thing I would say is that when we get our contracts right, we get our vision, our values correct, we've got to equally say, allow for the locality where the existence of the government to be the principal, accountable principles of that coalition. Where these ones have fallen apart is that their negotiations happen elsewhere and their execution occurs at source. And so people are very confused. Now today we're sitting here and, well, I said this in council, but actually my national leadership wanted this or whatever. That is not sustainable. So I think we need better practice, but we dare not give up on coalitions, because not only does it suit the government to say, well, better the devil you know, because that's what you have. It's a dangerous narrative for a country that thrives on democracy, because at best case scenario, let's dare never forget the fact that for Cape Town to have seen the change, it was a 7-party coalition. And whether you think Cape Town has gotten better or worse, realize that at least as a Democrat, that change was good for Cape Town.
And the 10-party coalition in Nelson Mandela Bay.
Absolutely.
Just to close off with, Mmusi, when you look ahead over the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Now, when you spoke here 2 months ago and you said, I'm prepared to be the president. In fact, I want to be the president of South Africa.
God.
A lot of people said, are you nuts?
Yeah.
How can you do this? Well, you've moved a little closer now by having a political party. But this political party is going to need to get a lot of votes to put you in the position, in a coalition, to be, first of all, to be bigger than the ANC and the EFF, and secondly, to elect you as the leader. So have you a target? I mean, how are you going to get there over the next 18 months?
Again, I come back to the magic number. Our job is to talk to 5 million people, right? And I know that might sound self-limiting, but I think if we can execute that better and be disciplined about it and be focused, citizens in this country are confident enough that if you give them a credible alternative, accrue the right number of people around you, I think they'll back us. I'm confident about it. I've seen their enthusiasm. And I think more than anything, most people who sit in this country realize we need change. So it's not Pollyanna-ish. It's born out of a strategic plan that knows which communities we target, how we go about, how we meet those people. But more than anything, it's also built out of the basic fact that on the overall, both in some ways the government and in some ways the opposition suffer from some of the negative traits that I think citizens sit and worry about. If we produce that fresh vision, that fresh hope, I think people will get behind us. I really do. I wouldn't do this unless I thought there was a realistic opportunity to raise and ask South Africans to do something. I've always asked them to go for hope rather than fear. I've always asked them I'm asking them a big thing. And I'm saying to them, together, let's get there. And, that's genuinely, and I'm not sitting here today saying I'm the bee's knees or whatever. I'm sitting here today saying I'm in the ring. If we want change, let's work together to achieve that. And I will partner with citizens who want to bring that change. Let's do it. I get quite passionate about this because I think sometimes we live in a culture that says, well, if and maybe and no, South Africa doesn't need that now. What South Africa needs is a South African who says, look, I will bring the best people to the table. We have a plan to get South Africa out of the trouble that it's in. We can work with even the current political system and the ones who are on the outside. We know which citizens we'll talk to, and ultimately give us an opportunity to give this country a fresh change that brings about a new government that will take us forward.
Dare to dream, the man in the arena. I love that quote, Mmusi, and thanks for bringing it to our attention again. Mmusi Maimane is the leader of the Build One South Africa movement, not the One South Africa movement anymore.
We have to build.
Build One South Africa movement, and I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.